You grab that knife off the counter, you drag it across some fancy gadget you paid good money for, and it still won't slice a ripe tomato without crushing it flat. You press harder, you saw back and forth, nothing. That blade is duller than it was this morning. I know that feeling. I lived that feeling for years. Here is the truth I wish somebody had handed me 40 years ago. You can take a knife so dull it slides right off your thumbnail, and in about 60 seconds make it sharp enough to shave the hair off your arm. No electric sharpener, no $30 kit, nothing you don't already own. I learned this from an old trapper up in the high country who never once bought a sharpening tool in his whole life. He'd laugh at the drawer full of junk I used to keep. Before this is over, I'm going to show you the exact method written down in a Frontier Trail manual from 1867, a trick so simple that once you see it, you'll be angry nobody told you sooner. And it works on the cheapest knife in your kitchen drawer tonight, standing right where you are. But let me back up, because I was the biggest doubter you ever met. For most of my life, I thought sharpening a knife was some kind of dark art. I figured you needed the right stones, the right oils, a steady hand, and about 20 years of practice. So I did what most folks do. I gave up on doing it myself. I bought the gadgets. I bought the pull-through sharpeners with the little cross carbide teeth. I bought the electric one that screamed like a dentist drill and threw sparks, and every single one of them let me down. Here's what I didn't understand back then. Those pull-through sharpeners with the carbide teeth don't sharpen your knife. They tear metal off it. They grab the edge and rip a groove right through it, leaving behind a ragged edge that looks sharp for about a week. I was grinding my good knives down to nothing. A blade that should last 30 years, I was wearing out in 3. I was paying money to destroy my own property. I didn't figure that out on my own. A man had to show me. It was up past the tree line. A cabin with no power and no running water, belonging to a fellow everybody just called Walt. Walt was somewhere north of 80, and he could still dress out a deer faster than men half his age. One evening I watched him pull a knife from his belt and slice a piece of paper clean in half, lengthwise, no sawing, just a whisper of steel through the sheet. I asked him what sharpener he used. He looked at me like I'd asked him what brand of air he breathed. He didn't own one. Not a single manufactured sharpening tool in that whole cabin. What he had was knowledge. Knowledge that got passed hand to hand for 200 years and then quietly disappeared the moment somebody figured out they could sell you a plastic gadget instead. A knife edge is just two surfaces meeting at a line. When that line is clean and fine, it slices. When it goes dull, that line isn't gone. Most of the time, it's just folded over. Microscopically, the very tip of the steel has rolled to one side like a wave curling over at the beach. That fold is called a burr or a wire edge. Your knife isn't worn out, it's bent. Walt explained it to me with a blade of grass. He said the edge of a working knife is soft as a spring and thin as a thought. Use it a while and it lies down. The job of sharpening isn't always to grind away metal and make a new edge. Half the time, the job is just to stand that folded edge back up straight. That is the whole secret the gadget makers don't want you thinking about. Because if you understood that your knife is mostly just bent and not worn out, you'd stop buying things to grind it away. Walt reached over to the shelf by his stove and grabbed a coffee mug. Just a plain, heavy ceramic mug, the kind you'd find in any kitchen in America. He turned it upside down, and on the bottom of that mug was the answer I'd been paying strangers to solve for 30 years. But before I show you exactly what he did with it, you need to understand why this knowledge vanished in the first place, because it did not disappear by accident. Go back 150 years. Every man on the frontier carried a knife, and that knife was the difference between eating and going hungry, between a warm shelter and a cold night. A dull knife could get a man killed. So sharpening wasn't a hobby. It was a survival skill, every bit as basic as building a fire. Nobody would have dreamed of paying another man to sharpen their blade any more than you'd pay somebody to chew your food. They used what the land and the home already gave them: a smooth stone from the creek bed, the bottom of a crock, a leather strap, and they got results that would put most modern kitchen knives to shame. I found a reference to this in an old trail and trapping guide, the kind of thin, hard-worn book a man would carry in his saddlebag, printed in 1867. In it, the writer describes keeping his skinning knife keen, using nothing but a smooth, water-worn stone and a strip of leather from an old boot top. He wrote that a man who could not sharpen his own blade in the field had no business calling himself a woodsman, plain as that. Now here's what happened. Somewhere in the early 1900s, and picking up speed after the Second World War, the whole country moved off the land and into the cities. 2 generations later, hardly anybody was skinning game or whittling tools. The knife became a kitchen thing you used and shoved in a drawer, and when it got dull, nobody in the house remembered how to fix it. That gap, that empty space where knowledge used to be, is exactly where the money got made. Because a company can't sell you knowledge your grandfather gave you for free, but they can sell you a gadget, and they can design that gadget to wear your knife out faster, so you come back and buy another knife and another gadget, on and on, for the rest of your life. They didn't have to hide the old way with some big conspiracy. They just had to wait for us to forget it. And we did. I sure did. I forgot it so completely I didn't even know there was anything to remember. So let me hand it back to you, the way Walt handed it to me. Let me show you what he did with that upside-down coffee mug. On the bottom of most ceramic mugs, there's a ring. It's the little raised circle the mug stands on. And on almost every mug, that ring is unglazed. It's rough, bare ceramic. Run your finger across it, and you'll feel it drag, like fine sandpaper. That rough ring is a sharpening stone, a real one. Ceramic is one of the hardest materials in your whole house, harder than the steel in your knife, and that unglazed ring has just the right grit to put an edge back on a blade. Walt held that mug down flat on the table with one hand. He took his knife in the other, and he laid the blade against that rough ring at a low angle, maybe the thickness of 2 stacked pennies off the surface. Then he drew the blade across the ring, edge first, like he was trying to shave a thin slice off the ceramic. Heel of the blade to tip, one smooth pull. He flipped the knife over and did the exact same thing on the other side, back and forth, alternating sides, maybe 10 passes each way. It took him under a minute. Then he sliced that sheet of paper clean in half like it was nothing. I stood there feeling like a fool for every dollar I'd ever spent. Now I'm going to walk you through this so you can do it tonight, because the details are where people go wrong, and I went wrong on every one of them the first few times I tried. First, the mug. You want a heavy one with an unglazed ring on the bottom? Flip yours over right now and feel it. If the bottom ring is rough and bare, you've got a sharpening stone that's been sitting in your cupboard the whole time. Put a damp cloth or a towel under it so it doesn't slide, and hold it firm. Second, the angle. This is the piece everybody obsesses over, and it's simpler than they make it. You want the blade tilted low, not standing up tall. Think about the height of 2 pennies stacked under the spine of the blade, somewhere around 15 to 20 degrees. If you hold the knife too upright, you'll round the edge off and make it worse. Low and shallow. That's the whole game. Third, the motion. Lead with the edge. You're moving the knife like you're trying to carve a sliver off the top of the ceramic, not back and forth like sawing. One direction, edge first, pulling the whole length of the blade across the ring so every part of the edge gets touched, from the heel near the handle all the way to the tip. Fourth, and this is the part Walt drilled into me, you switch sides every single pass. Left side, right side, left side, right side, equal count on each. That keeps the edge centered and even. If you do 20 passes on one side and 2 on the other, you'll push that folded burr over to one side and the knife will slide instead of bite. Do that for about a minute, then test it, and here is how a mountain man tests an edge, because you can't trust your eyes on something this fine. Don't run your thumb down the edge like they do in the movies. That's a good way to open your thumb. Instead, hold up a single sheet of paper by one corner, let it hang, and try to slice down through it. A dull knife will fold the paper and tear it. A sharp knife will glide through it with a clean, quiet cut, almost no resistance. When that paper parts like water, you're done. The first time my own kitchen knife slid through that paper, I actually laughed out loud, standing alone in my kitchen. 60 years old and grinning like a kid because a coffee mug did what a machine couldn't. Now, I can already hear some of you. You're thinking, that's fine for him, out in a cabin, living rough, but I'm not a woodsman. I've got a normal house and a normal kitchen, and I'm never going to skin a deer. Why does any of this matter to me? I'm talking straight to you now, because that was me too. And this next part is the part that changed how I look at my whole house. Let me tell you what a sharp knife actually does for an ordinary person living an ordinary life. That's what this whole thing comes down to. Somebody profited from you forgetting something your great-grandfather knew by heart. If this kind of knowledge speaks to you the way it spoke to me, I put a whole library of it together in my books, Mountain Roots, Deep Mountain, and Mountain Complete. Everything Walt handed me, and everything I've spent decades gathering from old guides, old trappers, and old ways that still work today, written down so it doesn't disappear again. You can find them linked in the description below. If you're the kind of person who wants these skills on a shelf where you can reach them anytime, those books were made for you. Now, I want you to understand what actually happens when a knife goes dull, because once you see it, the whole mystery falls apart in your hands. A dull knife is the most dangerous tool in your kitchen. That sounds backwards, but it's true, and the emergency rooms have the numbers to prove it. A dull blade doesn't bite into what you're cutting, so you push harder. Then it slips, and when it slips, it's got all that force behind it, and it goes into your hand. Nearly every bad kitchen cut I've ever heard of happened with a dull knife, not a sharp one. A sharp knife goes where you aim it. A dull one goes wherever it slides. So the first thing sharpening gives you is your safety back. If you've got shaky hands, if your grip isn't what it used to be, a sharp knife is your friend, because you're not fighting it anymore. Second thing, money. Think about how many knives you've thrown out or replaced because they wore out. They didn't wear out. They just went dull, and nobody in the house knew the 60-second fix. I've got a paring knife I bought for less than $1 at a yard sale probably 15 years ago. It's outlived 3 expensive knife sets because I keep its edge and they let theirs rot. A good knife, kept sharp, will outlive you and get handed to your grandkids. Third thing, and this one surprised me, your food is better. A sharp knife slices a tomato thin without crushing the juice out of it. It cuts an onion clean instead of bruising it, which, by the way, is a big part of why onions make you cry. It cuts meat across the grain in clean strokes instead of ragged tears. My wife noticed the food tasted different before she even knew I'd started sharpening my own knives. And you can keep every knife in your house singing sharp, using nothing but a coffee mug you already own and 1 minute of your time. You will never need to buy a pull-through sharpener again. You'll never pay to send your knives out again. That whole line of spending, gone, forever, for the price of knowing one old trick. But the coffee mug is only the first half of what Walt taught me, because a knife off that ceramic ring is sharp, but it's not yet what he called shaving sharp. There's a second step, And this is the one that separates a decent edge from the kind that stops you cold and makes you stare at it. Remember that folded over burr I told you about, the wire edge? When you sharpen on the mug, you clean up the edge, but you also raise a fresh little burr, a tiny ragged wire of metal hanging off the very tip. You can barely feel it, but it's there. And it's the difference between sharp and scary sharp. The old-timers had a way to deal with it. They stropped. Stropping is the thing barbers used to do with that long leather strap hanging off the barber chair, whipping the razor back and forth on it before a shave. And most folks today think it's just for old-fashioned straight razors. It isn't. It's for every blade you own, and it's the finishing move that turns a working edge into a razor edge. Here's what stropping does. It doesn't grind. It polishes and aligns. It takes that fine little burr and smooths it, straightens it, and strips it away, leaving behind an edge so clean and true it'll catch the hair on your arm. And you don't need a barber strap to do it. Walt used the back of his own leather belt, just took it off, looped one end around his boot or a doorknob, pulled it tight, and drew the knife backward along it, spine first, the opposite direction from sharpening, trailing the edge, never leading. Edge first on leather will just cut the leather and roll your edge right back over, so on the strop, you always drag the blade backward, spine leading, edge trailing behind, 10 or 15 light passes each side, and that's it. The knife comes off that belt with a mirror on its edge. And if you don't have a leather belt handy, I'll tell you the thing that shocked me most. You can strop a knife on the cardboard back of a notepad, on a folded piece of denim from an old pair of jeans, on the rough side of a leather work glove, even on a rolled-up newspaper. Anything with a little bit of texture and a little bit of give, because the whole job is just aligning and polishing that soft, thin, folded edge. Our ancestors weren't precious about it. They used what was in reach. I'll tell you something else that made me feel foolish. The first time I stropped a kitchen knife on the back of my own belt and then held up a hair from my head and it split, I sat down. I'd spent 30 years and hundreds of dollars, and the answer was a coffee mug and a belt I'd been wearing the whole time. Now let me give you the piece I promised you at the start, the buried one. The one from that 1867 trail manual that most folks alive today have never heard, and it's better than the coffee mug, because it costs nothing and it lasts forever. That old guide described how a frontiersman kept his edge in the field when he had no proper stone at all. And the answer was a smooth, flat, water-worn stone pulled straight out of a creek bed. Not any rock, a specific kind, the kind of fine-grained, close stone that a stream had rolled and polished smooth over God knows how many years. The writer called it choosing a stone that felt soapy to the wet fingertip, so fine you could barely feel the grit, and yet it would take an edge finer than anything a man could buy. Here's how you find one, because I've done this and it works. Go down to any creek or river with a gravel bed. Look through the flat, smooth stones the water has been polishing. You want one that's flat enough to work on, fine-grained, no visible crystals or sparkle, and smooth as a bar of soap when it's wet. Slate-like stones and fine sandstones are perfect. Wet it down, rub two of them together to feel the grit. When you find one that feels barely rough, almost creamy underwater, you've found a whetstone that cost you nothing and will outlast every gadget ever made. The old-timers kept their favorite creek stone for decades. Some passed them down to their sons. A man's sharpening stone was a personal thing, chosen by hand, carried in a pocket, worn smooth to fit his grip. There's a whole world of care and knowledge in that, and it got traded away for a screaming electric box that ruins your knives. You wet the stone, you use the same low angle, the same alternating passes, edge leading into the stone, then you finish on the belt, and I promise you a good creek stone and a leather strop will put an edge on a knife that no store-bought machine will ever match. That's not opinion. That's 200 years of men who'd have starved if they were wrong. And here's the part that gets me. This isn't lost knowledge because it stopped working. It's lost because it worked too well and it was free. You can't build a business on a rock from a river and the belt around a man's waist. So the whole thing got pushed aside, quietly, one generation at a time, until a grown man in his own kitchen stands there helpless, in front of a drawer full of dull knives, convinced he needs to buy something to fix it. He doesn't. He never did. The knowledge survived because men like Walt refused to let it go. He learned it from an old-timer before him, who learned it from someone before that, a line running straight back to those frontiersmen and their creek stones and boot leather strops. And that night in the cabin, Walt handed it to me. Now I'm handing it to you. That's how it was always meant to travel, hand to hand, not shelf to cart. Let me pull this all together so you can walk into your kitchen and do it tonight, start to finish. Flip your mug over and find that rough, unglazed ring on the bottom. Set it on a damp towel so it won't slide. Take your dullest knife. Lay the blade against that ceramic ring, low and shallow, about the height of 2 stacked pennies under the spine. Draw it across, edge first, heel to tip, 1 smooth stroke. Flip and repeat on the other side. Alternate, 10 passes each side, nice and even. It'll take you under a minute. Then take off your belt, loop it tight, and strop. Blade dragging backward, spine leading, edge trailing, 10 light passes each side. That polishes off the burr and lines up the edge. Then hang a sheet of paper and slice down through it. When it parts clean and quiet, with no tearing, you've done it. You've got a razor in your hand, made from a mug and a belt, in about 90 seconds total. And once you've done it once, you'll never fear a dull knife again. Not the kitchen knife, not the pocket knife, not the old hunting knife your father left you that's been sitting dull in a drawer because you thought it was past saving. It isn't. Almost nothing is. That's the freedom in this. You stop depending on anyone else to keep your own tools working. I think about Walt a lot. About how he had nothing by the world's measure. No power, no plumbing, no gadgets, and yet he was more self-reliant than any wealthy man I ever met. Because he carried his tools in his head, where nobody could sell them to him twice, and nothing could take them away. That's real wealth. That's what they quietly took from the rest of us, one convenient purchase at a time. You just got a piece of it back. You are not the kind of person who wants to be helpless in your own home. You're the kind who wants to know how things actually work, who trusts a method your own hands can prove over a promise printed on a package. That's why you're still here. That instinct, that refusal to just buy your way out of every problem, that's the same instinct those frontiersmen lived by. It's still in you. It just needed feeding. So here's what I want you to do. Go find a mug in your cupboard, flip it over, and tell me in the comments whether the bottom ring is rough or smooth. I'm curious how many of you have been sitting on a perfectly good sharpening stone this whole time without knowing it. Just say rough or smooth, and I'll read them. That one little detail tells me a lot about the mugs folks own these days. And if this reached you, if you're standing there realizing you've been throwing money at a problem your great-grandfather solved with a rock from a creek, then stay with me. This channel is for people who are done being sold their own heritage back at a markup. We're putting these old skills back into working hands, one at a time, the way they were always meant to be passed. Next time, I'm going to show you the old mountain way to keep food cold through a whole summer, with no electricity and no ice, using nothing but the ground under your feet, and one thing the settlers figured out about running water. It kept meat and milk fresh for men who'd never seen a refrigerator, and it'll knock your power bill down if you let it. But for tonight, go sharpen a knife. Grab that mug, grab your belt, and feel that blade come alive in your hand. Then remember, nobody handed you that. You took it back. Now, This video showed you what Walt showed me. But if you want to stand beside me and actually do it, come join me inside the Mountain Man Circle. I pick up right where we stopped. And you can ask me your own questions, with me answering myself. You're in good company here. Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen, and you can cancel any time.